My name is Iris, and I was 34 when I realized my place in the family had invisible rules attached to it. At my parents' 35th wedding anniversary celebration, my father casually pointed toward the garage and said, "That area's for extended family." The smug grin on his face told me he enjoyed saying it. Every cousin, every uncle, every in-law had a gold chair waiting at the main table, even the cousin who once stole from Grandma Ruth. I was the only one left standing in a garage that smelled of gasoline and old engine oil. What none of them realized was that the slim silver-wrapped package tucked beneath my arm was worth more than every floral centerpiece in that ballroom combined. 3 weeks later, because of what I did with that gift, their house would be completely empty. Welcome back to Diana True Stories, where the quiet ones finally write the ending, and the people who underestimated them discover exactly what they lost. If you've ever lived through a story like this, you already know the feeling. Leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe. Before I tell you what happened, let me tell you who I am. I'm a CPA specializing in forensic accounting, the kind of work where you spend endless hours in silent conference rooms, studying over a year of financial records until the smallest inconsistency reveals the entire deception. I built my career the hard way. Community college, night classes, 2 part-time jobs, a library card so worn that the barcode eventually faded away. Nobody paid my tuition. Nobody opened doors for me. Nobody even called to ask whether I'd eaten dinner. That matters because in the foster family, I was never the daughter people worried about. I was the daughter who worried about everyone else. If a utility bill was about to become overdue, I noticed first. If Thanksgiving dinner needed organizing, I created the spreadsheet. If Grandma Ruth needed her prescriptions collected or her furnace inspected before winter arrived, I drove 40 minutes each way and handled everything myself. Nobody actually asked me. Asking would have meant they noticed I existed. I simply did what I had always done since I was 19 years old. One afternoon, my mother looked across a mountain of unopened mail and simply said, "You're good at these kinds of things." That was my promotion. No paycheck. No title, no appreciation, just permanent responsibility for keeping an entire family functioning whenever something went wrong. My therapist once told me that excessive responsibility is trauma disguised as competence. She meant it as a warning. I accepted it like a career description. So when my parents decided to celebrate their anniversary, everyone naturally assumed I'd organize everything. I booked the venue, negotiated with the caterers, scheduled Grandma Ruth's wheelchair transportation, handled every tiny detail, right down to matching the napkin colors with the table decor. What I didn't realize was that I was also arranging my own humiliation. The anniversary celebration had been entirely my mother's vision. Diane Foster adored milestones, not because of their emotional meaning, but because they looked impressive. 35 years of marriage, 2 successful children, a beautiful colonial home with a wraparound porch, a hallway covered in smiling family photographs worthy of a greeting card commercial. She wanted the entire neighborhood to admire it. Make it elegant, she instructed me during a phone call 5 months before the event. Gold chairs, not white. Real linen tablecloths. And make sure the photographer spends time on the front porch. She never said please. She never said thank you. She only said, make sure. In our family, those 2 words always meant the same thing. Iris will take care of it. So, I created a planning binder, venue comparisons, catering proposals, an Excel seating chart with color-coded dietary restrictions. I devoted 11 evenings to making every detail perfect. At the same time, I started working on their anniversary gift. I'd been planning it for nearly 2 years. It required multiple conversations with the professional photo restoration studio in Richmond and another specialist who built museum-quality archival frames. My parents owned exactly 1 photograph from their wedding day. An old Polaroid. Its colors had almost completely faded. A crack split the middle of the image, and for decades it had been taped inside a kitchen cabinet door. I secretly borrowed it. Every damaged pixel was carefully restored. The finished photograph was printed on premium cotton rag paper and placed inside a handcrafted walnut frame. Inside the slim silver package, alongside that restored photograph, I included something else. A collection of documents. I'll explain those later. For now, all you need to know is this. The gift resting on the passenger seat as I drove toward the venue that Saturday afternoon was the most valuable, most personal, and most thoughtful thing I had ever created. For two people who had never once asked me what I wanted for my birthday, let me explain what an ordinary Tuesday looked like inside the Foster family. At 7:14 a.m., I texted Brett, my younger brother, 31 years old, full of golden retriever enthusiasm but somehow incapable of remembering that it was Aunt Carol's birthday. He never replied. At 7:45, I checked the Foster family group chat to confirm Grandma Ruth's podiatry appointment for Thursday. I was the group administrator. No one appointed me. Nobody voted. Back in 2014, I simply started posting family schedules and calendar reminders. I never stopped. At 9 a.m., I confirmed the anniversary deposit with the venue. At 11 o'clock, I emailed the caterer regarding my father's shellfish allergy, the same allergy he'd insist didn't exist until my mother sighed and confirmed that it absolutely did. At 2 p.m., my mother called. She didn't bother saying hello. Her first words were, "The florist needs an answer about the arch." "I already handled it," I replied. "Good," she said. Then she added, "Your father wants crab cakes." I reminded her about the shellfish allergy. She paused before giving the same answer she'd given me for years. "You always understand, Iris." 8 simple syllables. For most of my life, I believed they were praise. Eventually, I realized what they really meant. You won't argue. I don't have to explain myself. You'll accept whatever I give you. You'll always be the easiest path. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, I had coordinated vendors, managed medical concerns, solved catering problems, and reminded a grown 31-year-old man about a birthday he'd known about his entire life. None of it appeared anywhere in my job description. Every bit of it had become my responsibility anyway. The Foster family depended on Iris. And Iris depended on the quiet belief that if she ever stopped holding everything together, the entire system would collapse. Very soon, I was about to find out whether that belief was actually true. My father, Gerald Foster, was 63 years old, and he had a habit of counting every person in a room the moment he walked inside. Not because he was nervous, because he always wanted to know exactly how large his audience was. Gerald Foster never performed unless someone was watching. My father, Gerald Foster, had run for town council twice and lost both elections, yet he still introduced himself as a devoted community leader. At his retirement banquet from the county clerk's office, he stood behind the podium and spoke for 14 uninterrupted minutes. Public speaking never intimidated him. What truly unsettled him was the thought of speaking to an empty room. My mother, Diane, was different. She had grown up in crushing Appalachian poverty, 7 children squeezed into a small trailer, and that scarcity shaped the way she viewed everything in life. Even love, to her, was an investment with limited resources. She gave affection where she believed it would produce the greatest return. Brett was that investment. Handsome, outgoing, and naturally charming, he attracted admiration without trying. I wasn't the favorite. I was the framework that held everything together. Nobody applauds the foundation of a building. They simply expect it to keep standing. Brett had never organized a family gathering, paid a vendor's invoice, or driven Grandma Ruth to a single appointment. He never needed to. He simply arrived, smiled at everyone, and somehow ended up with the best meal and the warmest praise. Since life constantly rewarded him, he never questioned how the family worked. Then there was my cousin, Cody Marsh, 29 years old, drifting in and out of unemployment with a criminal record that included pawning Grandma Ruth's garnet earrings while she was recovering from hip replacement surgery in the hospital. My Aunt Deborah pleaded with my mother to forgive him, and Diane agreed because, in her opinion, family always deserved another chance. That Thanksgiving, Cody sat only a few chairs away from the grandmother he had stolen from, happily eating her sweet potato casserole and asking for another serving. Nobody objected. Nobody even seemed uncomfortable. That was simply how our family functioned. Gerald needed people to admire him. Diane invested her affection where she believed it paid dividends. Brett collected those rewards effortlessly. Cody received endless forgiveness, and I inherited every spreadsheet, responsibility, and invisible burden that kept everything running. About 90 minutes west of our home stood the old family cabin on Lake Monacan. It had belonged to my grandfather Harold before he passed away in 2011. I could still picture its cedar walls, the stone fireplace that leaned just slightly to one side, and the weathered dock whose gentle creaking sounded almost like music when I was 9 years old. Every Foster family memory worth keeping seemed to live there. 4th of July evenings with sparklers dancing over the lake. Thanksgiving dinners while Grandma Ruth's cornbread filled the cabin with warmth and the windows fogged over. Christmas mornings where the frozen lake shimmered quietly behind the decorated tree. After Harold died, ownership of the cabin passed jointly to Gerald and Ruth. Later, when Ruth moved into assisted living, Gerald effectively became the caretaker. Unfortunately, he ignored the one responsibility Harold had repeatedly reminded him about, paying the property taxes. By 2019, the taxes had gone unpaid for 3 consecutive years. The county mailed 2 warning notices, both of which Gerald simply threw away. Then, in 2020, a tax lien notice appeared buried beneath an empty pizza box in the recycling bin. I didn't ask anyone what I should do. I contacted the county assessor myself, arranged a payment plan, and over the following 4 years personally paid every overdue tax bill, every penalty, and even the special septic system assessment. Altogether, it came to $11,400, all paid from my own checking account in quarterly installments. I kept every receipt, every canceled check, and every official record. After each payment, I mailed Gerald a certified letter documenting exactly what had been paid. He never signed for a single one. Diane accepted delivery twice, but neither of them ever called or acknowledged what I'd done. I never brought it up because no one asked. In the Foster family, not asking was another way of saying it didn't matter. Because I quietly handled everything, the cabin remained in the family. The dock continued singing beneath our footsteps, and every Christmas Gerald proudly stood beside the fireplace telling everyone how Harold had built the place with his own hands. Not once did he mention the person who had kept it from being taken away. I carried that truth silently for years, like a folded deed tucked safely inside a wallet, waiting patiently for the day it would finally matter. The Wednesday before my parents' anniversary celebration, I sat at my kitchen table and slipped the final items into the silver folder. The restored wedding photograph looked flawless, every faded detail brought back to life and mounted on archival quality backing. Beneath it, I placed the paid-in-full property tax certificate, copies of every canceled check, every certified mail receipt, and a handwritten card. It read, 35 years of the Foster family. Here's to 35 more. The cabin is completely paid off, debt-free, and yours. Love, Iris. I sealed the folder, wrapped it carefully in silver paper, and tied it with a simple linen cord. It was thin enough to rest comfortably across my lap. I held it there for a long moment, imagining the look on my father's face when he finally opened it. Not the familiar smirk he wore whenever he felt superior, but the softer expression I'd witnessed only twice before in my life. Once after Grandpa Harold passed away, and once when Brett scored the winning goal during a junior varsity soccer game back in 2009. That quiet, genuine look was the one I hoped to see again. The expression I wanted to see, the one that quietly said, I finally see you. I convinced myself this gift might bring it out. Maybe 35 years of marriage, for years of silently paying off the cabin taxes, and restoring a nearly ruined wedding photograph would finally be enough. Enough for what? Back then, I couldn't have answered. Maybe just a proper seat at the table. Maybe an introduction that sounded like, this is our daughter, Iris. She's the reason everything stays organized. Just once, I wanted my name to exist without being attached to another responsibility. The next morning, I placed the silver-wrapped package on the passenger seat and drove toward the venue with the windows rolled down. There was a feeling growing inside me that I hadn't earned from experience. Hope. The stubborn kind that survives 15 years of disappointment and still believes this time could be different. If you've ever walked into a family gathering carrying something you poured your whole heart into, then you know how delicate that hope really is. The celebration was being held in the back garden of the Elks Lodge on Sycamore Street, the one with the white pergola and a parking lot that always smelled faintly of honeysuckle during August. I'd picked it because my mother wanted the event to feel elegant without looking flashy, which, translated into Diane Foster's language, meant expensive enough to impress, but practical enough to have plenty of parking. 64 guests. Gold Chiavari chairs with ivory cushions. Round tables covered in crisp white linen. A string quartet I'd hired through Thumbtack for $600. The photographer was already moving around the porch when I arrived, capturing shots of the floral arch I'd spent weeks planning with the florist through 4 long email chains and an entire Pinterest board. It looked perfect, exactly the way I'd imagined it. Holding the silver package beneath my arm, I walked through the side entrance, past the bar, the catering tent, and the guest book table I'd assembled the previous evening. Everything was exactly where it belonged. Everything I had touched was working. I stopped beside the seating chart displayed on an easel near the entrance. Table 1. Gerald.
Diane. Brett.
Aunt Deborah. Uncle Martin. Grandma Ruth. Table 2. The Marsh family, including Cody. Tables 3 through 8. Neighbors. Church friends. Coworkers. I traced every card with my finger. Table 4. Table 5. Table 6. Then I looked again. My name wasn't there. I searched every section a second time. The back rows. The overflow seating beside the pergola. Even the children's table that hadn't yet been assigned to any children. Nothing. The seating chart I had created didn't include me. I stood frozen, the silver gift still tucked beneath my arm while the photographer snapped pictures somewhere behind me and the string quartet tuned their instruments less than 30 feet away. According to the chart, I simply didn't exist. Then my father walked over. He smiled at me with the same polite expression people reserve for someone delivering a package and casually pointed toward the garage. The garage sat beside the lodge, connected by a narrow breezeway that smelled of old concrete and WD-40. It wasn't part of the celebration. It stored folding tables, traffic cones, and a riding mower with one flat tire. Dad guided me there with one hand resting lightly against my back, that familiar gesture that looked gentle from a distance but quietly pushed you exactly where he wanted. Inside waited a single white plastic folding chair, the cheap kind with metal legs that pinched your thighs if you shifted the wrong way. It stood between a paint-splattered workbench and a stack of bright orange traffic cones. There was no table, no plate, no place card. Above me, a fluorescent light buzzed with a high-pitched hum that made my teeth ache. A dark water stain stretched across the ceiling in the shape of a mitten. I focused on details like that because I refused to look directly at my father. If I met his eyes, I would have seen the smirk. And if I saw that smirk, I would have been forced to decide, right there and then, whether to fight. I wasn't ready. "It's only for extended family," he said. 5 simple words. He delivered them with the same detached tone someone might use while explaining airline seating rules. As though it were policy, not personal. As if the garden was first class, the garage was economy, and I simply hadn't earned enough points to belong. Through the wall, I heard the quartet begin.
Vivaldi.
I'd chosen that exact piece after emailing the quartet leader 3 different versions of the program before making my final decision. Now I listened to it through concrete blocks while standing beside a lawn mower, holding a gift I'd spent 2 years creating, as my father straightened his cufflinks and returned to his gold chair. I finally sat down. The plastic chair pinched immediately. I rested the gift across my lap and looked through the open breezeway toward the garden. From there, I could see roughly half the reception. Aunt Deborah adjusted her shawl. Brett wandered in late carrying a bottle of wine he almost certainly hadn't picked himself. Grandma Ruth sat at table 1 in her wheelchair, hands folded gently in her lap, scanning the crowd the way she always did, looking for me. Then my eyes found Cody Marsh. He lounged comfortably in a gold Chiavari chair at table 2, laughing at something Uncle Martin had said.
Cody.
The cousin who had stolen Grandma Ruth's garnet earrings, the pair Harold gave her in 1974, and pawned them on Route 9 for $215. The same Cody who never apologized because Diane insisted everyone should move on. He's been through enough. Cody had a gold chair, a printed place card, a champagne flute, a cloth napkin, a perfect view of the floral arch I had designed. I had a folding chair beside a can of Rust-Oleum. The quartet continued, playing through the wall. Glasses clinked somewhere beyond the garage. Someone made a toast I couldn't hear. The celebration I'd spent 11 late nights organizing, with my binder, my spreadsheets, and $600 worth of music, was unfolding barely 30 feet away. And I watched it from behind the breezeway like a stagehand who wasn't allowed on stage. I stayed there for exactly 11 minutes. I counted everyone. And during those 11 minutes, not a single person came looking for me. Not a single person came looking for me. That silence answered the question I'd been avoiding for nearly 15 years. Most people imagine a scene like this ending with shouting. They expect the plate to hit the floor, tears to spill, voices to rise, and someone storming out in front of everyone. None of that happened. What happened instead was simple mathematics. Sitting on that cheap plastic chair, I added everything together. 15 years of scheduling vendors, picking up prescriptions, organizing holidays, solving emergencies before anyone else even noticed them. For years of quietly paying the property taxes on the lake cabin my father proudly called his inheritance. $11,400. 2 years spent restoring a single wedding photograph. 5 months planning the perfect anniversary celebration. And in return, 1 chair in a garage. The equation didn't leave me furious. It left me certain. I hadn't been excluded from the celebration. I had never actually been invited into the family. Somewhere along the way, I'd mistaken being useful for being loved. That misunderstanding had cost me 15 years of weekends, holidays, birthdays, and countless Tuesday afternoons spent fixing everyone else's problems while never living my own life. The edge of the folding chair dug into my leg again. I looked down at the silver package resting across my knees. Inside was the most meaningful gift I'd ever created. A restored piece of my parents' history. A future secured for the family cabin, wrapped together with a simple linen ribbon. I had made it for people who believed I belonged beside a lawnmower. The hardest realization wasn't even the humiliation. It was knowing they fully expected me to stay there. To quietly listen to speeches through a concrete wall. To smile afterward. To help clear the tables. To pack decorations. To thank everyone for coming. Because that's what I always did. Because I always understood. That was the exact moment the numbers became a decision. Not a loud decision. Not one fueled by anger. The quiet kind. The kind that feels like hearing a lock click open after years of believing the door had no key. I stood. The folding chair scraped across the concrete floor, the sound sharp enough to echo around the empty garage. It sounded final. I picked up the silver package, tucked it beneath my arm, and walked back through the breezeway toward the garden. I didn't hurry. I didn't slam anything. I walked the same way I entered every forensic audit.
Steady.
Measured.
Calm.
The string quartet had just finished a song. Conversations drifted through the garden as guests waited for the next piece to begin. Nobody was paying attention. I crossed the edge of the reception. My mother noticed first. She always reacted to movement before she noticed people. My father finally looked up from his chair. Brett stopped laughing in the middle of a joke. I walked past the head table. Past Cody, who was eating a crab cake with his fingers. Past the guest book I'd assembled. Past the flower arch I'd spent weeks designing. Past the bar I'd coordinated. Straight toward the exit gate. Without slowing down. Behind me, I heard a chair scrape against the stone patio. Then my mother's heels. Iris. I kept walking. Iris, wait. And don't do this in front of everyone. I reached the gate before turning around. She stopped a few feet away. Her face carried that familiar expression she used whenever someone threatened to embarrass her in public. A strained smile. Tight eyes. Both hands raised slightly as though calming an unpredictable animal. You always understand, Iris. She said it like it was a spell. Like those 3 words had always been enough to keep me obedient. I slowly raised the silver package so she could see it, held it there for one quiet moment. Then I answered with only 2 words. You keep it. I turned away, walked across the parking lot, climbed into my car, and drove home. She never followed. That evening I sat on my couch with a glass of water. My phone lay face down beside me. I promised myself I wouldn't check it. 10 minutes later I reached for it anyway. The foster family group chat showed 47 unread messages. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect. Photos of the cake. Compliments about the decorations. People saying they had a wonderful evening. But farther down I noticed something else. A conversation from 6 days earlier hidden beneath the newer messages. I'd missed it because administrative notifications were filtered into another tab I rarely opened. The first message came from my mother. Seating update. Iris can sit in the side area. She'll probably be busy helping anyway. Dad replied almost immediately. Put her in the garage. We need the extra seats for the Hendersons. Brett responded with a laughing emoji. Then 3 words. She'll understand. LOL. Cody never replied. He didn't have to. The discussion continued for another 9 messages. They debated where to place the folding chair, whether they should warn me beforehand. My mother wrote,
No.
She'll only make it awkward. Then another message. She's handling the caterer anyway. She'll be too busy to notice. 9 messages. Over 6 days. An organized plan to seat me in a garage. Inside a group chat that I personally managed. No one even bothered deleting the conversation, because deleting it would have required remembering that I might actually read it. I stared at the screen twice. I didn't take screenshots. I didn't forward the messages. I didn't need evidence. This wasn't another investigation. It was simply the truth. For 15 years, I'd been operating a family that had never considered me part of it. They had written it down themselves. Carelessly. Because my feelings had never entered the equation. I locked the phone, finished my water, went to bed. The next morning I brewed coffee, sat at my desk, opened Excel, and created a brand new spreadsheet. Some habits never disappear overnight. Across the top I typed 5 column headers. Task. Frequency. Last completed. Replacement. Status. Then I began listing every responsibility I'd quietly carried for the foster family. Starting with Grandma Ruth's medical appointments. I began listing every responsibility I had quietly managed for the foster family over the years. Grandma Ruth's doctor visits, prescription pickups, insurance paperwork, the shared family calendar, birthdays, holiday planning, RSVP tracking, travel arrangements, the lake cabin, property taxes, maintenance schedules, winter preparations, the household bills Diane constantly overlooked, the medications Gerald forgot to refill, warranty claims nobody else bothered filing, and practically every part of Brett's adult life. I booked his dental appointments because he never remembered them and renewed his car registration because he never figured out how. Then there were the celebrations. Every Christmas gathering, every birthday dinner, every graduation party for 15 straight years, I had organized them all. When I finished, the spreadsheet held 41 recurring responsibilities. 41 jobs that had never officially been assigned to me. Nobody had acknowledged them, appreciated them, or compensated me for doing them. I stared at that list the same way I study financial statements when a client insists everything balances, even though every number proves otherwise. Numbers don't lie. I wasn't interested in slamming doors, writing emotional messages, posting online, or giving dramatic speeches. My plan was much quieter and far more effective. I was simply going to stop. Not with anger. Not all at once. Just stop. I removed myself as administrator of the foster family group chat. I disabled every recurring reminder. Any voicemail or notification would now go directly to the relatives whose names were actually attached to the accounts. If the foster family had been operating because I kept everything moving behind the scenes, they were about to discover what happened when the engine quietly stepped away. On Monday morning, I left the family group chat without saying a single word. By Tuesday afternoon, confusion had already settled in. 3 unanswered messages asked about Grandma Ruth's Thursday podiatrist appointment. No one knew the office address. No one remembered the appointment time. No one realized she had to enter through the wheelchair-accessible west entrance because the small lip at the east entrance always caught her front wheels. I knew every one of those details because I had personally taken her there 11 different times. Wednesday, I called Grandma Ruth myself.
Not through Diane.
Not through the family chat. Just directly. I told her I would still come see her. I told her I loved her. Then I explained that I was stepping away from coordinating the family schedules. If she personally needed me, she could always call. But appointments and planning would now have to go through Gerald or Diane. She stayed silent for several moments. Finally, she spoke. I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out. She never asked me to change my mind. She never tried to make me feel guilty. Instead, she repeated something Grandpa Harold used to say. The fence post carrying the most wire is usually the first one people forget to paint. After we ended the call, I cried for 6 minutes. Then I wiped my face and got back to work. I contacted the venue and transferred the remaining invoice into my mother's name. After that, I called the caterer, the photographer, and the string quartet. One by one, I handed over every vendor contact, every unpaid balance, and every remaining follow-up task to the people whose celebration it actually was. I didn't explain myself. I simply repeated the same sentence every time. I'm no longer the point of contact. Most of the vendors paused. One caterer even replied, "Really? I always thought you were the one running everything." For the next 3 days, the foster family group chat became strangely quiet. No one posted. No one asked where I had gone. The family calendar simply stopped moving, like a clock nobody remembered to wind. The first real crack appeared on Thursday. Diane called the podiatrist's office to reschedule Ruth's appointment and discovered the account was registered under my name. She didn't know the login information. She didn't know the insurance authorization code. She called me while I was at work. I let the call go straight to voicemail. The second crack came on Saturday. The venue emailed Diane about the refund for the post-event cleaning deposit. She had no idea a deposit even existed. She didn't know how much it was, which account it would be returned to, or when it would arrive. She called Gerald. Gerald called Brett. Brett texted me, "Hey, can you take care of the venue refund?" I never answered. The third crack was quieter, but far more revealing. The shared Google Calendar I'd maintained for 6 years, complete with color-coded birthdays, appointments, school events, and reminders, simply stopped updating. Aunt Deborah's birthday came and went without a single message from the foster side. Uncle Martin nearly missed the preparation for his colonoscopy because nobody remembered to send him a reminder. A plumber I had scheduled weeks earlier arrived to repair my parents' kitchen faucet, and Gerald answered the door wearing his bathrobe, completely confused about why a man carrying a toolbox was standing on his porch. For 15 years, I had been the reason everything continued to function. No one noticed because that's the nature of invisible work. When everything runs smoothly, nobody stops to wonder who's keeping it together. If you've ever been that person, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. Stay with me. This is the moment where everything becomes very quiet, before it gets very loud. And if this story resonates with you, consider subscribing so it can reach someone else who needs to hear it tonight. 3 weeks after the anniversary celebration, nobody from the foster family had called to apologize. They had, however, called me 11 different times asking for help. During the first 3 weeks, every phone call was about logistics, passwords, account numbers, appointment schedules, vendor information. But by the 4th week, the tone changed. The requests sounded less confused and far more entitled. One Tuesday evening, Diane called. "Iris, why didn't you take care of the caterer's refund? They're saying we still owe another $200. Her voice carried that familiar edge she always had whenever she felt embarrassed but refused to admit it. I listened quietly before answering. "I'm not the family office anymore. I'm just family now." Silence. Then she snapped. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means the caterer's phone number is printed on the invoice. And the invoice is already sitting in your email." She ended the call without another word. 2 days later, Dad tried a different approach. His voice was louder, less controlled. "Your mother's overwhelmed. The house is a mess. The calendar isn't working anymore. What exactly are you trying to prove?" I answered calmly. "I'm not trying to prove anything, Dad. I'm simply not doing it anymore." After my father said, "After everything we've done for you," his voice trailed off. It wasn't because he suddenly realized how unfair those words sounded. It was because he couldn't finish the thought. There was nothing concrete he could point to. No sacrifice made for me. No opportunity they had given up. No investment in my future that he could name. The accusations simply hung in the silence, unsupported. Brett never bothered to call. Instead, he sent a short text. "Don't you think you're making this a little dramatic?" I wrote several replies, erased every one of them, slipped my phone into a drawer, and went for a slow walk around the neighborhood. When I returned, another family group chat had already been created. Diane had started it without me. She called it family coordination. There were no reminders, no schedules, no organized plans, only a growing collection of complaints. That Sunday, I visited Grandma Ruth at Meadowbrook Assisted Living on Route 12. She sat beside the window with a crossword puzzle in front of her and a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The moment she saw me, her smile appeared gradually, gentle and warm, as though someone had slowly turned up a light. "There you are," she said softly. I sat beside her and finally told the whole story, from being seated in the garage, to discovering the group chat, to the spreadsheet, and finally my decision to step away from carrying the family. She listened without interrupting once, something she had always done better than anyone else. When I finished, she rested her pen on the crossword and quietly said, "Your mother wasn't always like this." I looked at her. "When Diane married your father, she became the person who managed everything for our family. Every holiday, every thank you note, every birthday, every little responsibility." She smiled faintly. "My sister Peggy used to tease her by calling her the family secretary. Diane hated that nickname. She promised herself she'd never let her own daughter end up in that role." Ruth paused before continuing. "But then you came along. You were capable, reliable. You handled everything so effortlessly that somewhere along the way, she forgot exactly how heavy that burden had once felt." It wasn't an excuse. It didn't erase the humiliation of the garage, the cruel messages in the chat, or 15 years of invisible labor. But for the first time, I understood that my mother hadn't been born into this behavior. She had once occupied the same invisible chair before quietly handing it to me. Understanding her didn't make what happened acceptable. It simply reminded me she was flawed, not beyond humanity. Ruth reached across and squeezed my hand. "Promise me you'll keep taking care of that lake cabin. Harold always hoped it would belong with someone who truly loved it." I squeezed her hand back. At 88 years old, Ruth still understood the family better than everyone else combined. 6 weeks after the anniversary party, another problem arrived. On a Monday morning in September, Gerald called me at exactly 7:40. He was furious. "The county just mailed a notice about the cabin. They're charging us a $4,000 assessment. Did you know anything about this?" "I did," I answered calmly. "I've been tracking it for almost 2 years. The county had been replacing the sewer system along the lake road, and every homeowner on that stretch was responsible for part of the cost. I'd already planned for it, even setting money aside in a separate account and marking the deadline in the family calendar, the same calendar nobody had bothered to check. "The payment is due October 15th, I told him. "You've still got 6 weeks." 6 weeks? Iris, why didn't you tell us? I did. It was on the calendar. What calendar? The one nobody ever opened. Silence filled the line. Finally, he said, "You need to take care of this."
No.
The word surprised even me. I'd said it to clients before. I'd said it professionally. I'd said it to strangers. I'd never said it to my father. It felt like setting down a box I'd carried for so many years that my arms had forgotten what empty hands felt like.
"I'm not handling it," I said.
"The cabin belongs to you. The assessment is addressed to you. The county office is on Miller Street, open weekdays from 9 until 4. Without another word, he ended the call. I remained at my kitchen table, staring at my hands. They were trembling, not because I was frightened, but because they suddenly had nothing left to carry. A few weeks later, I was sitting at my friend Margot's house, sharing wine, crackers, and the story I'd been holding inside for years. Margot was a family therapist with a private practice in Charlottesville. After listening quietly, she leaned back and said, There are thousands of women living exactly like this. She meant it as a clinical observation. I heard it as a personal truth. Women who managed entire families behind the scenes without recognition. Women who answered every emergency phone call but were forgotten when appreciation was handed out. Women who confused being indispensable with being loved. I asked her whether she'd ever considered starting a support group for women like us. She smiled. I've been waiting for someone to ask. Our first meeting took place on a Wednesday evening in October inside the back room of a small coffee shop on Main Street. 7 women came. 2 daughters, 3 sisters, 1 aunt, 1 grandmother who had managed her grown son's household for 22 years despite never being invited to his wedding anniversary celebration. We didn't call it therapy. We called it the backup chair. Because every woman in that room knew what it felt like to support everyone else's celebration while quietly sitting out of sight herself. The first person to speak was Karen, a 51-year-old office manager from Westboro. She looked around the room and asked a question I'll never forget. So, I'm actually allowed to stop? She said it with the same uncertainty as someone asking permission to breathe. The room fell completely silent. Then someone chuckled. Someone else started crying. Before long, every one of us was sitting there with cold coffee and paper cups, realizing that for the first time in a very long while, none of us had to carry the weight alone. The backup chair group kept meeting every other Wednesday. By the time December arrived, attendance had grown to 19 women, with even more waiting for a place to open. Diane finally made her move in November. Instead of calling, she sent me a handwritten letter on expensive cream stationery, the same kind she reserved for notes to the pastor. Dear Iris, I don't understand what's happened. You've always been the dependable one, the person who keeps this family together. Without you, everything is falling apart. Your father won't admit it, but he's overwhelmed. Brett can't keep the calendar organized. Nobody knows how to manage Grandma's appointments. You're pulling this family apart, and I don't believe that's who you really are. Love, Mom. It was the longest letter she'd written to me in 34 years, yet every sentence felt less like love and more like a job description. She never asked if I was okay. She never mentioned the garage. She never apologized. Her only concern was that things were falling apart. What she was really saying was, the machine has stopped working. And what she wanted was simple. Come back and become the machine again. Dad chose a different approach. One Thursday afternoon, he walked straight into my office, loud enough for my assistant to hear every word. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? I quietly led him outside into the parking lot. What exactly have you done for me, Dad? He opened his mouth, hesitated, then finally answered. We raised you. You raised me to manage your household. Those aren't the same thing. Without another word, he turned around and left. I returned to my office, closed the door, and sat silently in my chair for nearly 10 minutes. According to them, I was destroying the family. The truth? I had simply stopped doing years of unpaid labor. Nothing more. When someone treats your boundaries like a personal attack, it's often because they confused your constant service with your love and only realized the difference once that service disappeared. If you've ever heard someone tell you, after everything we've done for you, you'll understand exactly what I mean. By the end of November, even the extended family began noticing how much invisible work had disappeared. Aunt Deborah casually asked my mother why no Thanksgiving planning email had gone out. Linda, Uncle Martin's wife, called Diane wondering why Grandma Ruth's November appointments hadn't been updated in the shared calendar. The problem was, there was no shared calendar anymore. Linda had no idea. No one knew how to explain that a system everyone relied on had actually been managed by just one person all along. To his credit, Brett honestly tried to replace it. He created a new Google Calendar, invited everyone, and entered 6 events: Thanksgiving, Christmas, his own birthday, 2 placeholders labeled TBD, and a weekly reminder that simply read, "Check in with Grandma." There was no time, no address, no phone number. The entire system survived 9 days. On the 10th day, Brett accidentally scheduled his gym session at the exact same time as Thanksgiving dinner before sending a message to the family. Can somebody else handle this? I'm drowning. He'd been overwhelmed after only 9 days. I'd carried the responsibility for 15 years. Meanwhile, Cody suddenly reappeared. Aunt Deborah added him to the family's new group chat, and his very first message was a GoFundMe campaign asking for money to repair the car he'd purchased with funds no one could properly explain. Only 2 relatives donated. Brett was one of them. The Foster family had become a complicated machine trying to operate without the person who had quietly kept every part moving. Appointments slipped through the cracks. Bills were mailed to the wrong address. Even the Thanksgiving turkey was picked up on the wrong day because nobody remembered to confirm the order. Gerald carved the meal in complete silence. Diane smiled through dinner the way she'd always smiled, like everything was perfectly fine as long as appearances remained intact, even if everything underneath was collapsing. Grandma Ruth's 89th birthday fell on December 14th. Diane handled the planning, which meant she booked a table for 12 at the same restaurant Ruth had visited for 3 decades. She never checked Ruth's dietary needs. She never arranged transportation. She never contacted the grandchildren. She simply made the reservation and posted the date in the new family chat. I only learned about it because Ruth called me herself. Your mother says we're having dinner, she told me softly. She never asked me what I wanted. What Ruth truly wanted wasn't a restaurant. She wanted the lake cabin. She wanted fresh cornbread, the warmth of the old stone fireplace, and the peaceful sound of the dock beside the water. But the cabin had its own problem. Gerald still hadn't paid the special county assessment. The October 15th deadline had already passed. A second notice had arrived. The county had added a 12% penalty. Gerald had ignored it, just as he ignored every responsibility that didn't come with praise or attention. 3 days before Ruth's birthday, Diane called. Your grandmother wants you there. Will you come? I will, I answered.
Not for Diane.
Not for Gerald. For Ruth. She had never hidden me away in a garage. She had never reduced me to the organized one. She had always tried to understand me before expecting anything from me. So I agreed to sit at that table one last time. But this time I wouldn't arrive empty-handed. And I certainly wouldn't arrive unprepared. Over the next 2 days, I put everything together. Not a birthday gift. A simple manila folder. Inside it were tax records. The family dinner wasn't going to be casual anymore. Inside my bag were tax documents, vendor invoices, and a detailed timeline listing every responsibility I had handled for the Foster family from January 2009 through August of this year. 41 recurring duties. 15 years of unpaid work. Not a single acknowledgement. If they wanted a family discussion, I was finally prepared to have one. The gathering was held at Birch and Barrel, a farm-to-table restaurant along the old highway. Exposed brick walls, glowing Edison bulbs, and a menu proudly featuring foraged ingredients gave the place an upscale charm. 12 members of the Foster and Marsh families sat around a long oak table. Gerald occupied the head seat, Diane beside him, Brett next to Diane, Aunt Deborah, Uncle Martin, Cody, Linda, 2 of Ruth's friends from Meadowbrook, and finally me, seated beside Ruth's wheelchair at the far end. I hadn't come empty-handed. The folder stayed hidden in my bag. What everyone could see was the old white plastic folding chair from the garage. A week earlier I'd returned to the Elks Lodge and asked whether I could purchase it. The manager smiled and said they were throwing the chairs away, so I could simply take it. I carried it into Birch and Barrel and placed it beside the chair assigned to me, the one closest to the kitchen entrance, exactly where I expected to be seated. I never unfolded it. I leaned it quietly against the wall behind me, scratched, worn, and impossible to ignore. Diane noticed immediately. Her eyes shifted from the chair to me and back again, but she remained silent. Gerald never noticed. He rarely paid attention to anything that didn't reinforce the image he had of himself. Brett glanced at it for a moment before deliberately looking elsewhere. Ruth gently touched my arm. Good, she whispered. The remaining guests settled into their seats as drinks were served. Warm amber light from the Edison bulbs washed across the oak tabletop while conversations drifted around the room. I waited patiently, the folding chair behind me, and the folder resting inside my bag. I already knew what was coming. In the foster family, nobody questioned whether I'd eventually be asked to solve another problem. The only mystery was how long it would take. It took exactly 23 minutes. Once the appetizers had been cleared and everyone had relaxed into comfortable conversation, Gerald leaned forward, looked directly at me, and spoke. Iris, we need to discuss the cabin. The table immediately fell silent, not because the subject was uncomfortable, but because Gerald had used his familiar patriarch's tone. It sounded polite on the surface, yet everyone knew it wasn't really a request. The assessment is overdue, he said. There's already a penalty. And nobody can access the tax account because everything seems to be under your name. It is under my name, I replied calmly. I created the account, and I've been managing the payments.
Fine, he answered.
Then transfer it back. Transfer what, exactly? The account. The login. Whatever you've done. The cabin belongs to the whole family, Iris. I looked straight at him. Once again, he was rewriting history while everyone watched. Suddenly the cabin belonged to everyone. Yet somehow the taxes, paperwork, deadlines, and payments had belonged only to me. You'll always be family, Gerald said. Then came the sentence that exposed everything. When we need you. He spoke as though it were praise. But it sounded more like someone thanking a repairman for arriving just in time to fix another problem. Around the table, no one met my eyes. Aunt Deborah stared down at her plate. Linda glanced toward Uncle Martin. Brett buried himself in his phone. Cody suddenly found the bread basket fascinating. Diane looked at me with that familiar smile she always wore whenever she sensed disaster approaching, hoping optimism alone could prevent it. Without raising my voice or standing up, I reached into my bag and placed the manila folder on the table. I opened it and turned the pages so everyone could read. This, I said evenly, is every responsibility I've handled for this family since 2009. 41 recurring jobs. Grandma Ruth's medical appointments. Insurance claims. Prescription management. The family calendar. Every birthday. Every holiday. Every RSVP. Every anniversary celebration. Every graduation party. Vendor coordination. Household maintenance. Brett's vehicle registration. Dad's prescriptions. Mom's warranty claims. I flipped to the next page. And this section concerns the cabin. In 2020, I found a tax lien notice sitting in the recycling bin. 3 years of unpaid property taxes, plus penalties. I paid a total of $11,400 over 4 years. I mailed certified letters documenting every payment. They all came back. I pointed toward another page. Your mother personally signed for 2 of those letters. The receipts are attached. Then I turned to the final section. And this was your anniversary gift. I removed the silver presentation folder from my bag. It was still wrapped with the linen cord I'd tied around it months earlier, slightly creased from sitting untouched in my closet. I untied the ribbon and laid everything before them. The restored wedding photograph of Gerald and Diane from 1989 rested on top, showing 2 young people standing nervously outside the courthouse, wearing borrowed clothes and holding hands. Underneath were the paid-in-full tax certificate, canceled checks, and every certified mail receipt, including Diane's signatures on the green delivery cards. Finally, I placed the handwritten note on top. 35 years of the foster family. Here's 35 more. The cabin is paid off, debt-free, and completely yours. Love, Iris. Not a single person spoke. The restaurant, so noisy only moments before, became completely silent. The only comforting touch in the room was Ruth's hand resting gently on my arm. Deborah covered her mouth in shock. I looked directly at my father. The night I planned to give you all of this, you put me in the garage. You sat me on a cheap folding chair between a lawnmower and a can of spray paint. You organized it in a group chat. You laughed about it. And you did it because you assumed I'd understand. I let the silence settle over the room. Now I finally do. My father's expression changed in stages. First came surprise. Then calculation. Finally, anger. That brief moment of calculation mattered most. For a split second, he weighed two choices: offer an apology or launch a defense. He chose the defense. Because admitting the garage incident was wrong meant admitting the entire family dynamic was wrong. And that entire system revolved around him. "You're twisting everything," Gerald snapped, his voice growing louder. "You were helping with the setup, Iris. Nobody punished you by putting you in the garage. That's where the spare chairs were, and you've always been willing to pitch in." "There was only one chair, Dad," I replied calmly. "And you smiled when you saw me sitting there." His face flushed deep red. "This is your problem," he shot back. "You take everything personally. Somehow, every situation becomes about you. I've spent 35 years building this family, and you're ready to destroy it over one folding chair." I never raised my voice. I didn't need to. "You didn't build this family," I said quietly. "I did. You simply showed up." The entire table seemed to recoil. Gerald pushed back his chair so hard its legs scraped loudly across the hardwood floor as he stood. Beside him, Diane began to cry. Not sudden tears, but familiar ones, the kind that always appeared at exactly the right moment, carefully arranged to shift everyone's attention. "Iris, please," she whispered. "You've always understood us. We never meant to hurt you." I nodded. "I finally understand." Those 3 words ended the conversation. Diane had nowhere left to go. Her usual script always depended on me accepting responsibility, because no one had ever refused that role before. Brett kept staring at the tablecloth, unable to lift his head. Cody shifted nervously in his seat. Then Aunt Deborah turned toward him with a look she'd clearly been saving for years. "Since we're finally telling the truth," she said, "where are my mother's earrings, Cody?" The silence broke. Not into shouting. Into honesty. One truth after another began surfacing. I remained seated at the end of the oak table beside the one person who had always truly seen me. Behind me, the old folding chair still leaned against the wall. I looked back at Gerald. "You said the garage was only for extended family." I paused. "Then consider this an extension." He had no reply. For the first time in 63 years, the family patriarch had lost his audience. I quietly closed the folder. Then I placed the restored photograph, the silver-wrapped gift, and every document in front of Ruth. "These were always meant for you," I told her. Ruth studied the restored wedding picture of Gerald and Diane standing outside the courthouse decades earlier. She gently traced the edge of the frame with one finger, touching it like someone reaching back into a memory that still felt alive. Then she looked up at me. "Harold would have seated you at the head of the table." I slowly stood. Not in victory. Not in anger. Simply with the same quiet certainty I'd carried when I walked out of that garage 4 months earlier. The difference was that I wasn't carrying a secret anymore. I was finally putting it down. I looked around the table. "I'm not cutting any of you out of my life," I said. "I'm not disappearing. I'm simply going home, to my own table." Then I faced my mother. "If you truly want a relationship with me, it begins with my name on a real chair, not with another responsibility, another checklist, or another unpaid job. Just my name." Diane couldn't answer. Gerald remained silent. Brett looked as though he wanted to speak, but no words came. Ruth rolled her wheelchair back from the table. I walked behind her and gently pushed her toward the restaurant entrance. No one tried to stop us. Outside, the night air was crisp and cold. The parking lot smelled of fresh pine mulch mixed with car exhaust. I folded Ruth's wheelchair into the back of my SUV, then helped her settle into the passenger seat. She fastened her own seat belt, smiled softly, and said, "I'd like cornbread tomorrow." I smiled back. "Then tomorrow we'll have cornbread." We drove home through the darkness with the heater humming softly and the radio turned off. Ruth quietly hummed an old tune I didn't recognize, perhaps one Harold used to sing. Back inside Birch and Barrel, the white folding chair still rested against the wall. This time I didn't need it, because I finally had a place at my own table. And whatever happened next, I was ready for it. The impact of my decision became visible almost immediately. Within just 2 weeks, Diane hired a part-time care coordinator to manage Ruth's appointments and daily needs, paying $1,400 every month for work I had once done without recognition. The caterer from the anniversary celebration mailed a collection notice because no one had submitted the refund paperwork for the cleaning deposit. Brett forgot to renew his vehicle registration and ended up being stopped on Route 7 for driving with expired tags. Meanwhile, the lake cabin's special assessment had grown to $4,480 after penalties and remained untouched on Gerald's kitchen counter beneath a stack of unopened envelopes. He didn't deal with it until January, after the county sent a second warning threatening further action. Cody's GoFundMe campaign managed to collect only $300. After Aunt Deborah questioned him about her mother's missing earrings, the conversation quickly turned ugly. When Cody admitted through text they were just sitting in a drawer, Deborah immediately removed him from the family's new group chat. For the first time in years, the Foster family began to understand the true cost of running a household after the person carrying all the invisible responsibilities stopped doing it for free. The cost wasn't just financial. It demanded time. It required planning. It forced everyone to notice the countless details they'd ignored for years. Most importantly, it destroyed the comforting illusion that everything somehow worked on its own. It never had. The system had always depended on one person. That person was Iris. By February, our support group, the backup chair, had grown to 26 members. The coffee shop where we'd first gathered could no longer hold everyone, so we moved our meetings to the community room of the Unitarian Church on Cedar Avenue. Karen, an office manager from Westboro, arrived at every meeting carrying homemade banana bread. She'd place it on the table with a smile and joke. "This is the only loaf I bake for people who actually appreciate the effort behind it." Margot continued leading the discussions. Most evenings, I simply listened. For the first time in my life, I was learning how to be present without feeling responsible for making everything work. Outside the meetings, my forensic accounting practice flourished. I welcomed 3 new clients. I finally repainted my kitchen. I even went on a date with a man named Owen. He never asked me to organize anything, not even dinner. He chose the restaurant himself, made the reservation, and quietly pulled out my chair before I sat down. I almost cried. Every Sunday, Ruth came over for dinner. Without fail, I baked fresh cornbread because it had become our little tradition. She sat at my real dining table, a sturdy oak table I'd found at an estate sale in Staunton, and spent hours telling me stories about Harold, the lake cabin, and the familiar creak the dock made every June. I always sat at the head of the table. No one assigned me that seat. I simply claimed it. One Sunday afternoon in March, after we'd finished eating, Ruth and I lingered over coffee. The restored wedding photograph from the silver anniversary gift now hung proudly in my hallway. That had been Ruth's idea. "Your parents can have it when they've earned it," she'd said with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived long enough to recognize true respect. Every afternoon, sunlight drifted across the frame. Gerald and Diane, standing on the courthouse steps in borrowed clothes, holding hands. 2 young people who were frightened and hopeful all at once. I looked at that photograph every morning before leaving for work. Not with bitterness, not with sadness, but with a simple truth that had finally become clear. Love without respect eventually becomes unpaid labor. And I had decided my free labor was over. A seat you must earn every single day was never truly yours. The people who genuinely love you don't make you prove your worth before offering you a place. They pull out your chair before you even arrive. The moment you stop paying emotional rent just to remain at someone else's table is the moment you discover where you truly belong. I found my place. It wasn't in a garage. It was at a table I built for myself, surrounded by people who never expected me to carry the entire weight of their lives. That's my story. 15 years of invisible work. 1 forgotten folding chair. And an anniversary gift they never truly earned. If you've ever been the family's invisible support system, the one everyone depends on but rarely thanks, let this be a reminder. You have every right to sit down. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear these words today.